David, what in your mind is the biggest misconception about sports agents, and what would be maybe the most accurate portrayal of sports agents?
Well, like any group, I think it's impossible to make a blanket statement about it. I mean, agents have a very negative reputation because there are a lot of really bad agents out there. And when I say bad, a lot of them are not very competent. They're not trained. They don't know the collective bargaining agreement. They don't know the rules. They're not trained negotiators. A lot of them have severe ethical lapses, and because the union doesn't have the resources in football. I mean, the NCAA on both sides of the table. The NCAA can't police the rampant cheating that's going on in college sports and football and basketball. That's why you have the O.J. Mayo situation, and what happened at Ohio State, what's happened in Miami. And the unions who regulate the agents really don't have the police force, if you will, to regulate it. So it's become like the Wild West. And because of that, I think the agents in general have gotten the worst reputation possible. Then you have pieces like 60 Minutes with Drew Rosenhaus, who I find comical. Spending 15 minutes self-promoting himself. And it's what you expect. For me, I try not to get hung up in the broad brush of how people feel. I think I have my own reputation. I think I march to my own drummer. I consider myself a dinosaur. I want to do it. I'm old-fashioned. I'm old school. I'm going to continue to do it my way. If I can't sign another player the old way, so be it. I can accept that, but I'm not going to change and do something I'm not comfortable doing. And I think that I will attract the last 5 players who want to do it the old-fashioned way and want someone who's brutally honest with them, who's not going to lie to them, and tell them they're going to go higher in the draft than they can go, promise them things they can't deliver. And is going to be there because I'm only going to have 10 guys. I don't have runners. I don't have recruiters. I don't have junior people. It's me. If a guy wants to be managed by me, and I feel it's the right fit, well, I'd love to do it. That's how I felt about Evan Turner. We got Evan Turner because we were the only people in the country to tell him to go back to school when he was a sophomore. Everyone else told him to come out, and he didn't feel he was ready to come out. He was a very mature young man, and I think he just, more than anything, appreciated the honesty. There's not a lot of honesty. I'm not here to say that I'm the only honest person in the country. I don't want to sound like a megalomaniac, but I think that the competitive pressures in the business force some very good people to do things that they're not comfortable doing to get clients, and I'm not going to do that. I mean, I've said many times, if LeBron James would come to me out of high school and said, "I'll sign you if you paid me $1," I wouldn't pay him, because once you pay a person $1, it puts you in a different class than people who don't pay. And I think that to make the kind of decisions that I've had to make with clients over the years, I mean, I had recommended to Kevin Matano not to marry a woman 48 hours before his wedding because she wouldn't sign the prenup. I had to tell Alonzo Mourning to turn down the first $100 million contract in sports, because I think it was too long and too much deferred money. I've had to tell Michael Jordan some very, hard things. They got involved in gambling situations. And I think in those instances, if they don't trust you, then you lost the game. And when you pay them up front, they don't trust you. And you've lost the trust before you start, so you might as well not play the game. And that's just an unfortunate reflection of where we are in 2011 in the sport. And I feel more sorry for the players who when they're very young and needy, and they get bamboozled into signing with people who really can't help them, and they start the career off on the wrong foot and make terrible decisions. I feel sorry for them. I don't want to represent 100 players. I don't want to represent 50 players. I don't want to represent 20 players. But I'd like to see the competency of the industry improved, and that's only going to happen when the union steps in and when they find a guy like O.J. Mayo cheating, being paid instead of suspending some junior guy in the office, you suspend the guy who owns the business because he's responsible. It's exactly what's going to happen at Penn State now with Joe Paterno. It's interesting to see what the NCAA does when you have criminal activity on the campus with a legendary coach who I have great respect for. I always think the buck stops at the top.
David, when you negotiate a deal, how do you define success?
It's a great question. I'd say to negotiate a successful deal, both sides have to come away with a deal that works for them. You know, if you do a deal that's too one-sided, unless it's a lifetime deal, it's going to come back and haunt you in round two. And so when I was young, I teach this when I teach negotiations, both at the college level and law school. You know, negotiations is not a zero-sum game where one side wins and one side loses. One of the biggest problems in collective bargaining, as we sit here today, 36 hours away from the deadline, losing what I think will be losing the season. The players' mentality, players are conditioned. They only have two outcomes when you play a game: you either win or lose. There's no ties in basketball. This isn't soccer. You know, there's no ties. So you either win or you lose. In negotiations, nobody wins. In an ideal situation, nobody loses. One person may get, you know, a richer part of the deal because they have more leverage, but no one should lose in a negotiation. So a successful negotiation is when I look at negotiation, George, as a process. When people say, what is negotiations? Negotiations is a process of finding creative solutions to business problems. It's not just simply about making money. Bringing two parties together who have different needs and different wants and trying to bridge the gap. I think I'm a very creative person, and so I try to find creative solutions to problems. And I think that if you feel there's only one way to do the deal, I think it's very hard to bridge the gap. But I think you have to have a realistic assessment. One of the great things my mom taught me when I was probably 8 years old, and she knew I wanted to be a lawyer, she told me that a great lawyer understands his opponent's case better than his own. It's like saying that a great coach who's done his scouting understands how the other team can play as well as his own team, so he can adjust during the game to changes. And I've always tried to really prepare and understand what does the other side need to make the deal, what are the other side's strengths and weaknesses, and how can I make that work, you know, for my client. I think that in the current negotiation, I don't think either side did a very good job of doing that, of ascertaining, identifying really what, you know, what's needed. I think the players to come out and suggest that the league wasn't losing money, you know, when they audited financial statements, you know, I don't think that was a good play. I probably would agree if I studied the financial statements that probably some aspects of the losses that I would challenge. Like, for example, depreciation, which is a non-cash expense. I would probably challenge what they call related party transaction, where an owner owns the arena and he owns the team. Perhaps he's charging an above market rent to the team because he wants to show the arena's making money, or a media company that owns the team and perhaps they're not paying market value television rights to the team because they're trying to be more successful. There may be 25% of losses. You might want to agree really aren't losses, but to suggest that there are no losses, you know, I think is foolish. I think that we could have shortened the period of time, you know, had there been a little more good faith on both sides. And that's, you know, in my world, as aggressive as you want to be, you know, I think you still have to maintain the kind of relationships that enable you to make deals. You don't want to inject your personality to the extent you can't make the deal. And, you know, I think I'm highly motivated. You know, people say aggressive. I think I'm ambitious, and I want to be satisfied that I'm making a good deal for my client, but you have to be mindful of what the other side needs to make a deal.
David, I'd like to, with your permission, just ask you 3 closing questions, and one of them would be, if you could invite any 5 people in the history of the world to dinner, who would they be and why?
Great question. Well, clearly one would be Bill Gates. I've never met Bill Gates. We were actually invited when Michael was playing in Seattle during the finals. Bill Gates invited Michael and his wife and myself to come to dinner at his brand new home, which is supposedly, you know, state of the art. It was Juanita George's birthday, so Michael said he couldn't come. I said, Michael, come on. Juanita has a birthday every year. This is like a very unique opportunity, but we didn't go. And I have great respect for Bill Gates. I think he's one of the, you know, innovators in America in the last 100 years. He'd certainly be one. Colin Powell would probably be another man who's been successful in the military, you know, side, on the civilian side. He's one of the most respected African American, you know, people in the world. someone I always had a desire to meet. I wouldn't say I'm scientifically oriented, so probably wouldn't be necessarily interested in meeting like a doctor or scientist. I never met Tiger Woods, ironically. Michael's invited. I had dinner with Tiger Woods 4 or 5 times, but there's always a large group of people. I'm a huge Tiger Woods fan. I'd love to meet Tiger Woods. I don't think there's been an athlete in the last 25 years that's closer to Michael Jordan than Tiger Woods. And I would, I'm a golfer. I love to play golf. I love to play golf with Tiger Woods. I actually called Mark Steinberg a couple of years ago when they were playing here in Washington and said, look, I know he's very busy, but it was possible. It wasn't the U.S. Open. It was a minor tournament. I'd love to have a drink with him or dinner. It didn't work out. So Tiger Woods is certainly, a person I'd like to meet. Obama is a person I've been dying to meet since he got into office. I'm friends with Rahm Emanuel and his brother Harry. There's a guy who went to Duke, Reggie Love, who's sort of this guy. I voted for Obama. I think Obama is, as a guy who got dealt a really tough hand, and like he's classy, he's presidential, he's a sports junkie, and it'd be a great honor. I've met a few presidents. I've met Clinton a few times. I'd love to meet Obama. That's probably my top 4. I'm not sure there's any fifth person off the top of my head. Probably a lot of them. A lot of people I'd like to meet. I've been very fortunate because of the people I've worked for to have a chance to meet Bill Clinton or George H.W. Bush, some presidents. I've met the heads of most major companies in America. Something I never would have imagined when I was a lawyer. I say to people, think about it. If I was a lawyer working at a big law firm and I called up Tiger Woods' agent saying, I'd like to meet Tiger Woods, say, step in line, there's like 4,000 people, ahead of you. When you call up and say, hey, I've been involved with Michael Jordan, John Thompson, Coach K, these are my clients, people give you access that you wouldn't otherwise have, and that's a very special gift for me. I've had a whole education from very bright people that I never thought in my wildest imagination I had a chance to meet.
Wild dream. David Falk, elected President of the United States. What would you do to turn the economy around and restore Americans' people's confidence in government?
Great question. Well, ironically, I'm an economics major in college, and while I don't claim to be Ben Bernanke or Paul Samuelson, I believe the single biggest problem we have in America in the economy today. The single short-term problem is obviously jobs, but the single biggest problem is that there's never been a time in the history of the country when there's been a greater concentration of wealth at the top. The top 1% of the people probably own 60% of the assets in America. And I think that's a very dangerous development because I think that when you put middle-class people like my parents, they'd be struggling to raise their family in today's environment with health care and just the general cost of living. I think that wealthy people have to pay more taxes. They have to share. It's what they called in the old days noblesse oblige. And all these Republican candidates that keep saying that we need to cut spending but we shouldn't raise income is ridiculous. We need to do both. We do need to cut spending. Government is by definition inefficient. But I think that we have to increase the tax burden on ultra wealthy people who can afford it, and I think we need to do. My biggest disappointment with Obama's presidency to date is that while I applaud his efforts to streamline the healthcare system, I think the number one priority from day one should have been job creation. The things that he talked about in his campaign, infrastructure. You look at what brought us out of the Depression. It was government involvement in the Tennessee Valley Authority and the WPA, was building buildings and infrastructure that puts people to work. And I think we need to take our resources in America and create much more infrastructure. I think we have diverted an enormous amount of resources to 2 wars during the Bush administration. That while I think that the challenge of terror is one of the greatest threats facing America today, I'm not sure that when we get out of the war, I'm not sure we're going to have accomplished. That's what worries me. I'm not sure that all the hundreds of billions of dollars we spent, that we're going to have accomplished a great deal because the war is religious-based. And I think it's very difficult to solve a religious-based war militarily or politically. You know, the British were in Afghanistan, the Russians are in Afghanistan. Over the last 100 years, no one's been successful doing that. Iraq, I look at Iraq. Iraq's really not a country. Iraq is really three countries. And the British, you know, put three people together that aren't exactly the most hospitable neighbors, that you all have to live together in the same house. And, you know, they've been having a dispute since 700 AD over who's the rightful heir to Muhammad. I don't think the United States is going to walk in and solve that question ever. You know, or I don't think the Chinese could walk in and do that. And so I think that today, to go back to your very first question, and this may be way off base, but if I had a seat of the pants opinion, it would be that the amount of our deficit is probably very close to the exact amount of money we really spent in Iraq and Afghanistan since 2003. And if we would have invested that money in infrastructure in America, I think we'd be in a dramatically different place economically than we are today. And I think that when Obama assumed the presidency, it would have been impossible for him to pull the plug. And even if he wanted to, they would have said a typical Democratic president, soft on defense. You know, so now he stayed in there and they criticize him for prolonging the war. And that's what's wrong with politics today, is that we've lost a sense of communality. I think the Republicans are more intent to take down the Democrats than they are to solve problems. The Democrats think the same way. They're more intent to beat the Republicans than they are to solve the problem. You know, I think that we've become so polarized as a country more than any time in my 61 years on this earth that it's scary to think that we can come together. You know, to put it at the extreme is I think that if on the eve of the budget crisis, when we're discussing how to prevent the country from going into default, I think if Obama would have said, if we don't raise taxes, then 10 most important buildings in America will be raised by terrorists next week, the Republicans would have said, hey, I can't raise taxes, I've signed the pledge. I think we've become so ideologically stuck in our positions that we've lost the ability to think creatively. And I don't blame that on any one party. I'm not a party person. There are a lot of Republicans. I'm a Democrat. My parents were laborers. They worked in unions, so I've always voted Democratic. But John Huntsman is a friend, someone I know and supported as the governor of Utah. His father's a very dear friend of mine, John Huntsman Sr. I'm a big fan of Mitt Romney's. I like him. I'm a huge fan of Orrin Hatch, who I've got to know over the years. Big basketball fan, very conservative, more conservative than I am, but if he ran for president, I'd vote for him tomorrow. I think he's very honest. So I'm not a party person, but I think our country has become so polarized that it's a very dangerous place to be because we become gridlock.
Let's end on this one. When many years from now, when they close the curtain on David Falk's life, how do you want to be remembered?
I like to be remembered as a person who is a devoted father to his children, and as a person who really cared about his clients and gave everything he had to do the best job he could.
David, thank you very much.
My pleasure.